Wide shot, a November field before dawn. 40 acres of corn still standing. Brown, rattling. Not one stalk cut when every other farm in the county has its grain in the bin. The whole township is talking about it. Medium, a gravel lane, a green Chevy from another decade rolls past with the headlights off. Slow, watching. The driver lifts one finger off the wheel and drives on. Closer now, a farmhouse. Kitchen light bleeding through a curtain. A supper table set for three. A father with a rod in his hip. A mother with her hand flat on the oilcloth. And an empty chair, close up. The chair fills. A young woman, 21. Freckles and cold flushed cheeks. Wisps of chestnut hair loose at her temples. She sets a blue leather ledger face down on the counter. Handwriting no one in this house has spoken of in 64 years. Her father sets his fork down. I is about to say something no daughter wants to hear. 2:47 in the morning. November. Cold enough to strip the words out of your throat before they made it past your teeth. A young woman stood at the edge of a 40-acre cornfield. Not cut, not gathered. Standing brown and rattling in the wind the way the whole county said it should not be. She wore a red and cream plaid flannel under a caramel canvas jacket softened by years. Blue jeans faded around the knees. Her hair pulled back into a low practical ponytail. Wisps loose at her temples. A flashlight in her left hand. In her right, a blue leather ledger. She was 21 years old, and she was betting the whole farm on a dead woman's handwriting. Why was she out there? Why was the whole county laughing? And why would the man who was at that very moment driving past her fence with his headlights off bring his hat off his head and hold it against his chest by January? 3 flashes, a supper table, a fork set down slow, a father saying the closest thing to a raised voice all fall, an ice-glazed field with cattle bawling at a wire, a herd walking fat out across snow while a whole township counted losses. But to understand any of it, you had to go back to April. You had to go back to a girl who was not a girl anymore. Not really, because she had not been a girl since the tractor rolled 2 Aprils ago. Marigold Ashcroft. Everyone called her Goldie. Everyone except her mother, who called her Marigold when she was proud and Mari when she was scared. And her father, who had not called her much of anything since the accident, because talking took wind, and wind took strength, and strength took time. And Rowan Ashcroft did not have time to waste on the shape of his own daughter's name when the day was going to get away from him anyway. He had been 66 years old the morning the tractor went over. How was 68 now? There was a rod in his hip. His right leg would never carry him full strength again. And the doing of this farm had fallen, piece by piece, season by season, to the girl. She had been 19 when it happened. She had been 3 months into her second year at the state college, studying agricultural science, bringing home syllabi and thick textbooks and ideas about soil chemistry that she was going to bring back and show her father over supper. Because Rowan Ashcroft was the kind of man who listened, even when he disagreed, especially when he disagreed. He was not one of those fathers who put a daughter's book down and said, "This isn't for you." He had been proud. That was the word. He had been proud in a way he did not know how to say out loud. Rowan had married late. Rowan had married Odette the fall he turned 42. Odette had been 21. Everyone in the county had said something. Everyone in the county always said something. Rowan had let them say. Odette had let them say. And they had gone on down the county road to their own farm and their own supper table and their own quiet. Marigold had come along 5 years after that. When Rowan was 47 and Odette was 26, the only child, which was a shape the whole family had lived inside for 21 years. And then April had happened, and the neighbor had found him under the tractor on the slope east of the machine shed. And the ambulance had come, and the surgeon had said he will walk, but not the way he used to. Goldie had come home the same afternoon. She had unpacked her suitcase in her old bedroom. She had not gone back, and that had been almost 2 years ago. And in those 2 years, she had learned to grease a bearing on a combine, to back a stock trailer around a mailbox in the dark, to read a weather map like a hymnal, to make the math work on 40 head of cattle and 40 acres of corn and a hip fund that ate through the account every month like a slow, steady moth. She had learned all of it, and the county had watched. Some of it had watched with the kind of admiration a small township gives a young person who does not complain. Some of it had watched the other way, the way a hungry dog watches a wounded rabbit, because there is always a Bohalloran. The screen door slapped shut behind her. Kitchen light, warm butter smell, the radio going low. Odette Ashcroft did not turn from the stove. "You come in this house with cold on you, take the boots off at the mat." "Yes, ma'am." "And wash the mud." "Yes, ma'am." Goldie set the blue ledger on the counter face down. She did not know why she did it face down. Yes, she did, because Rowan was already at the table, and Rowan had not seen the ledger yet, and Goldie did not want him to see it yet, because he was going to see it. Eventually. She just wanted to pick the eventually herself. She peeled the jacket off, hung it on the hook, sat down at her plate. Meatloaf, green beans out of a jar Odette had put up in August. Cornbread with a crust the color of a good barn roof. Rowan Ashcroft was looking at her. Not eating, just looking. She lifted her fork. He set his down, which was how she knew, because in this house, in this family, in the whole long groove of it, the man who set his fork down before a bite was the man about to say the thing he did not want to say. "Marigold," she looked up. "That field." She looked at him. "That field's coming down by Saturday. You cut it, or I'll bring the combine in and cut it myself." Odette's hand went flat against the oilcloth. The radio kept going. Some old country station out of the next county. A steel guitar the exact color of the wind outside. Goldie set her fork down. "Daddy," "I said what I said. Daddy, by Saturday." "Wait." That was all she gave him, because that was all she had been giving anyone since September. One word. The county had heard it from her at the co-op, at the feed store, at the fence line when Dale Halloran's Daddy Bo leaned on the wire and asked what in the good Lord's name she thought she was doing. And she had said, "Wait." Rowan Ashcroft pushed back from the table. Not fast. Nothing about the man was fast anymore. Slow and even and heavy, the way a barn door pushed back when the hinge had settled a full inch out of true. "You've had all fall," he said. "Every other farm in the county's got its grain in the bin. You've got mine standing in the wind like we forgot how to run a combine, like I forgot. You didn't forget. Then why? Wait. Wait for what, Marigold?" "January." He looked at her, just looked. The way a man looks at a stranger who came to his door and started speaking a language he almost recognized. And then he picked up his fork. And he did not eat with it, he just held it. Because a man of 68 does not stand by while his only daughter lets 40 acres of good corn rot on the stalk. Except it wasn't rot. But he did not know that yet. Odette lifted her hand off the oilcloth. Slow. She set it on his shoulder. Slow. She did not say anything because there was nothing in this kitchen that a word from her would fix. But her hand said the thing her mouth would not. Which was, "Rowan, let the girl finish." He shrugged the hand off. Not mean, just tired. And Goldie took her plate and her fork and her half-eaten cornbread, and she got up and she walked it to the sink, and she washed it, and she dried it, and she hung the dish towel on the hook by the window where her mother had hung a dish towel for 26 years running. And she said, without turning, "I'll be in the barn," because the ledger was still face down on the counter, and she was going to take it with her. The barn, not the machine shed. The barn, the old hip roof one, the one her grandfather Elias had raised in 1958, the summer he came home from Korea. The one that had wintered cattle before her father was born. The one that smelled the way a barn smells when it has been a barn for that long. Which is to say, like grain dust and leather and old iron and the particular clean cold of a place that has been used by careful hands. She lit the kerosene lamp at the workbench. Because there was electricity out here, sure, but the electricity had never made a barn feel like a barn. The kerosene did. Her grandfather had known that. Her grandfather had known a great many things, or so she had thought, until this morning, until the ledger. She set it on the workbench. She opened it. Blue leather, softened at the corners, a brown ribbon marker that had faded to almost gray. Inside on the first page, in a hand that was neat and small and slightly slanted, the way a woman was taught to write in a country schoolhouse before the war. Winifred Ashcroft, Wintering Ground, 1961. And she sat down on the milking stool because her legs did not want to do the standing thing anymore. Because Winifred Ashcroft was not her grandfather. Winifred Ashcroft was her great-grandmother, dead almost 64 years. Dead the winter of 1962. Dead of pneumonia was the story if you asked the family about it, which nobody ever did, because Ashcrofts did not ask each other about the dead ones. Ashcrofts kept the dead ones in their own corner of the kitchen wall in silver frames and did not disturb them. That was how it had always been. But this was not a corner of the kitchen wall. This was 42 pages of practical winter feeding notes in a woman's hand. Dated the fall, her great-grandmother had been 38 years old, and her great-grandfather Otis had been 40. The fall before the winter she died. And the note said, "Do not cut the corn, do not haul the corn, do not buy back the hay. Let it stand. Let the cows walk to their supper." She ran her thumb across the phrase, because there it was, in blue-black ink, in the hand of a woman she had never met, a woman whose name was not carved anywhere on this farm, except for a small stone in the family plot that read, "Winifred Ashcroft, wife, mother, and nothing else." As if she had been only those two things. As if she had not also been the person who worked out on paper how to winter 40 head of cattle for the price of some wire and 2 feet in the snow. She turned the page. She turned the next. She turned the next. And the pages were maps, not fancy ones, grease pencil sketches on gridded paper, but maps of this farm, the bottom 40, the east 20, the lower pasture, little arrows, little numbers, feed strips 3 days wide, a note in the margin. If ice break the crust with the spud bar, do not open a wide face to the wind. Do not open a wide face to the wind. She read that line 3 times because she had opened the whole West End. She had done exactly the thing the woman said not to do. And she had done it because she had read the note wrong. Because the first time she had read the ledger back in February, when she had found it under the old tarp in the hip roof rafters, she had skimmed past the ice line. Because in February there had been no ice. In February there had only been math. The math had been what got her. The math and the man's letter from the bank. $47,000, due the 15th of March. That was what the letter said. Not in a threatening way, in an accounting way, which was worse, because a threat you could argue with. But an accounting was just the truth doing what the truth does, which is stand there with its arms folded until you do something about it. $47,000, plus the operating note, plus the HIP fund, plus the equipment note on the old John Deere that Rowan had bought used the summer before the accident, back when a summer was still a working summer. And she had sat at the kitchen table one night in February when Rowan was asleep in the recliner and Odette was at church for the Wednesday women's group. And she had put her grandfather's cattle ledgers on one side of the table, and she had put her father's bills on the other. And she had done the arithmetic a scared young woman does when she is not sure she is supposed to be doing it. And the arithmetic had said, if we combine the corn the normal way, we will clear a little. We will spend the little and more than the little buying hay at panic prices to winter 40 head. We will go backward. We will lose the place. But if we do what Winifred wrote down, no harvest cost, no fuel, no hauling, no hay bill. in what the extension office was saying might be the worst hay year the region had seen in a decade. The same 40 acres would winter the herd for almost nothing. The farm would carry through to spring, and Rowan Ashcroft would not know his daughter had done it to save his hip from bankrupting his father's barn. Because Rowan Ashcroft was a proud man laid low, and she could not stand to say out loud, "I am doing this because we are almost broke, and you cannot work." So she had said, "Wait," and she had taken the mockery, and she had let the county think what it thought. She closed the ledger. She sat in the kerosene light. She looked up at the rafters of a barn her great-grandmother had probably stood in, which was a strange thought, a stranger thought than she had allowed herself before, because she had always known this barn as Elias's barn, grandfather Elias, who had died when she was 14 and had left her the tools and the ledgers and the low, soft whistle of his voice saying, "Land don't forget who worked it right. Land remembers." But the barn had not started with Elias. The barn had started with Otis. And Otis had married Winifred in 1941. And Winifred had worked this ground beside him for 21 years. And then she had died. And nobody had said her name at the supper table again. Goldie was not sure how she knew that last part. But she knew it. The way you know a thing when you have grown up in a house where a person is not talked about. It is not that they say we will not speak of her. It is that they do not speak of her. And a child hears the silence before she hears the words. She had grown up in the silence of Winifred Ashcroft, and this morning she had opened the silence, and the silence had turned out to be a plan. The next day was a Tuesday. She was up before the light. She always was. She fed the cattle in the near pasture. She checked the water tank. She walked the fence on the west quarter because there had been a coyote through the second week of October, and the wire needed looking at once a week just to be sure. And on her way back up the lane, Bo Halloran's truck was at the mailbox. Bo Halloran had been trying to buy or lease the Ashcroft bottom for 2 years. Because a wounded farm was a smell to Bo. And Bo had a good nose. Bo had been born with a good nose. His daddy had been the same way. There were 3 generations of Hallorans in this county with a talent for smelling. And Bo was standing at her mailbox smiling, which was the worst thing Bo's face did. "Well, hey there," he said. She did not answer. She kept walking. "That corn," she kept walking. "You leaving it up on purpose, sweetheart, or is the combine down?" She stopped. Because sweetheart. Because he knew what he was doing when he said sweetheart to a young woman on the fence line of her own place. She turned. Bo Halloran was 54 years old, sandy hair going the color of a rain-stained fence post. A canvas jacket a lot cleaner than any working farmer's jacket had any business being. Boots that had never once been in a hog lot. And that smile like a man who thought he was doing you a favor by talking to you at all. Han owned the 800-acre operation on the West Quarter, and the feed store on the county road, and the local hay brokering license, and a mortgage on every one of those things. The last part she did not know yet, but she would. "Combine's fine," she said. "Then why?" "Wait." "Wait, huh?" "Wait," he laughed. Because a man like Bo Halloran laughs at wait the way another kind of man laughs at prayer. Because it costs him nothing to laugh at it, and because he does not believe in either one. "Listen, honey," he said, and she wanted to walk right then, and she did not, because if she walked, he would tell every man at the co-op she had run. So she stood. "You leave corn standing this late, you lose it. Coons, deer, wind, rot. You're gonna wake up one January morning and there won't be a cob left on a stalk out there. Wait, sweetheart. Mr. Halloran, you got a hard year ahead is what I'm saying. Bad hay year, your daddy's hip, bank paper due." I know about the bank paper. She did not move. She did not blink. But something inside her ribs did a fast, small thing that she did not want him to see. Because how did he know about the bank paper? "When it goes bad," Bo said. "And it will. You come see me. I'll take that bottom off your family's hands." Fair. He said fair, the way men say fair, when they mean the opposite. And then he tipped his cap, and he got in his truck, and he drove off with the muffler doing that low, proud rumble a truck does when the man who owns it does not have to think about the fuel it burns. She stood at her mailbox. She waited until his taillights turned onto the county road. She said, out loud, to nobody, to everybody, to her great-grandmother in the barn behind her, "Fair." And then she said the other thing. The line her grandfather had taught her when she was 10, and Bo Halloran's own daddy had been the one at the fence, because there had been a Halloran at that fence every generation of this family. "Let it stand," she said. "Let the cows walk to their supper." She walked back up the lane. That night she could not sleep. She lay on her back in the room that had been her room since she was 3. Blue wallpaper with small white flowers her mother had hung the summer Goldie learned to walk. A quilt her grandmother Elowen had pieced from feed sacks in 1974. A shelf with 3 books and a jar of prairie grass her grandfather had cut for her the last summer he was alive. Her father coughed in the next room. Once, twice, then quiet. She got up. She went down the stairs in her socks. She sat at the kitchen table. She did not turn the light on. There was moon enough coming through the window over the sink. She took the ledger. She set it in front of her. She opened it to the map of the West End. She looked at the arrow her great-grandmother had drawn. And the note, "Do not open a wide face to the wind." She had already done it. She had already opened a wide face to the wind. Because Winifred had not been talking about the whole West End at once. Winifred had been talking about 3-day strips, small strips, a face the cattle could finish in a day and a half. So that if the ice came, and it always came, the ice would only find a small face, not a big one. And she had strung her wire that first Sunday of November across the whole West Quarter, wide open, the whole face of it turned to the wind. She sat at the kitchen table in the moonlight, and she understood that she was going to have to move the wire. Not this week, not the next, now, tomorrow morning, before the first ice, because she did not know when the first ice would come. Nobody knew. The extension office was calling for a warm November, but 1961 had also been a warm November until it wasn't. Winifred had written that in the margin too. Warm Novembers turn hard. Do not trust a warm November. She put her forehead down on the ledger, just for a second, because she was tired. Because a young woman is not supposed to know this much about mortgages and cattle, and the specific weight of a father's silence at a supper table. She let herself have the second, and then she picked her head up, and she said out loud to the kitchen, "All right then," the way her great-grandmother might have said it, sitting in this same kitchen 64 winters ago. The sound of a truck at 4:30 in the morning. Not Bo Halloran's truck. She knew Bo's truck. This one was older, slower, a muffler that had been fixed too many times by somebody who did not care about the way a muffler sounded, just about the way it worked. She went to the window. A green Chevy from about 1984 had pulled in at the end of the lane. The driver's door opened. A man got out. Tall, thin, wool coat, a hat pulled low. He walked to the tailgate. He pulled out a spud bar and a coil of electric wire and a roll of fence flags, and he set them at the base of the mailbox. And he did not knock. He did not come to the door. He just set the things down. And he stood there a minute looking at the corn. She put her coat on over her nightdress. She went out. The man was about 72 years old, beard trimmed close, coat unbuttoned in the cold because his kind of man did not feel cold the way other kinds of men felt cold. He looked at her when she came up. He did not smile. He did not smile. "Miss Ashcroft." "Yes, sir." "I'm Osias Fenwick." "I know." Everybody knew Osias Fenwick. Osias Fenwick had been the large animal vet in this county for 42 years. He had put down her grandfather's last calf when Goldie was 9 years old, done it so gentle she had not understood until later that the calf had been sick. He had retired 11 years ago. Everybody had said he would go to Florida. He had not gone to Florida. He had bought a small place on the county road and lived there alone and kept his own beef and did not answer questions about why he had not gone to Florida. I brought you a spud bar, he said. She looked at it. You've got the wrong wire up, he said. She looked at him. Move it, he said. 3-day strips. Face south when you can. When you can't break the ice with the bar before you turn the cattle in. Don't let them lift their heads for it. Cattle lifting their heads for ice will crack a jaw. He said all of this the way another man might have said. The weather is turning, she said. How did you know? Know what? How I've got the wire up. He looked at her a long second. He said, I've been down that fence line every morning of the last 2 weeks, she said. Why, he said. Because your great-grandmother taught me to graze corn when I was 7 years old. And then he touched the brim of his hat, and he got back in the green Chevy, and he drove. She stood in the road with a spud bar in her hand. The corn rattled in the dark. Somewhere in the pasture a heifer coughed. Once, then quiet. And she stood there, because she did not know what to do with what she had just heard. Because it meant her great-grandmother had not been alone. Because it meant somebody in this county besides her had been carrying this knowledge for 64 years. Because it meant a 72-year-old man had been driving down her fence line every morning at 4:30 for 2 weeks. Not to help, not yet, just to watch. Just to see what the girl was going to do with the ledger. Just to see if she was the one. She did not sleep that night either. But she did not need to sleep that night because she had work. By Wednesday afternoon, the wire was moved. She had strung it in 3-day strips down the length of the west quarter. Narrow faces, southerly where the ground allowed. She had walked the whole run twice with the spud bar over her shoulder just to know the feel of it in her hand for when she would need it, which she thought would be a matter of weeks. She was wrong about that. It would be a matter of days. But she did not know that yet. She came in from the field at supper time, mud on the jacket, cold in her hands. Odette at the stove. Rowan in the recliner watching the small television he watched every afternoon since the accident. Odette turned. He's not talking to you tonight. I figured. He'll come around. She hung the jacket. Ma. Did great-granddad Otis ever talk about her? Odette went still at the stove. Not scared still, just quiet still. The way a woman goes when the thing she has been waiting to be asked has been asked at the wrong moment. She turned the burner down. She wiped her hands on the towel. About who? Great-grandma, Winifred. Odette looked at the doorway to the living room. Rowan's television was going. Low. He would not hear over it. Odette lowered her voice anyway. Not much, she said. Not to me, not to your daddy. Why? That's not for me to say. Ma. Marigold. Goldie waited. Odette folded the dish towel. She set it on the counter. She smoothed it flat with the palm of her hand, the way she had smoothed 100,000 dish towels in this kitchen. Slow. Deliberate. Your great-granddad Otis was a good man, she said. I want you to hear me say that first. He was a good man. Ask anybody. He was fair with his hands, and he was fair with his money, and he was fair with the Lord. But he did not think a woman knew a barn. Goldie stared at her. Winifred kept ledgers, Odette said. That was her way. Kept 'em on the winter feed, kept 'em on the calving, kept 'em on the field turn. And Otis let her keep 'em because it kept her busy. And then one year, this would have been about 1958, she wrote a plan for wintering the herd on standing corn. And she told him. And he told her that was the daftest thing he'd ever heard out of a woman's mouth in his own kitchen. And that was that. Goldie sat down at the table. Odette went on. But she kept the ledger, and she added to it every fall. And the winter of 1961, when the hay ran short in the county the way it might run short again. This year she went out one morning without telling him, and she strung a wire, and she opened one strip of the West 40, and she turned the cattle in. And she died in February of pneumonia, because she had gone out 4 mornings in a blizzard to break the ice for the cattle. And Otis had told her to leave it, and she had not left it. And she took a chill she never got shed of, Goldie said. He wouldn't help her. He wouldn't help her. He wouldn't help her because he wouldn't say he'd been wrong. Odette did not answer, which was its own kind of answering. Goldie put her hand on the table, flat, the way her mother put a hand on the oilcloth when the room got too tight. She said, "How did you know all that?" Odette said. "Because Wilma Fenwick told me. Osias Fenwick's mother. When I was about your age, before I married your daddy, she sat me down at her kitchen table and she said, 'Girl, if you are going to marry into that family, you are going to know the woman they don't say the name of.' And she told me. And Rowan, your daddy doesn't know. Ma, your daddy loved his granddaddy. Otis raised him after Elias took sick that first time. Your daddy has one memory of his granddaddy telling him, 'Winnie was a fine woman, just weak of chest.' And that's what your daddy carries. And I have not had it in me, in 26 years, to take that away from him." Goldie sat at the table. She looked at her hands. Her mother said quietly, "You found her ledger." "I found it in the rafters, under the tarp, in February." "Oh, honey. I did the math on it." "Oh, honey." "Ma." Odette came and sat down across from her. "Ma, we owe $47,000 in March." Odette closed her eyes. Just for a second. Just long enough to be a woman who already knew. "I know," she said. Goldie stared at her. "You know. I've been opening the mail 2 weeks before you." "Ma." "I put it on the counter where I know you check." "Ma." "Because I didn't know how to tell your daddy either." There was a long minute, in the kitchen, in this house, between two women in the same family who had been carrying the same weight from different sides of the same table without knowing. Goldie said very quietly, "Winifred's method will pay it." Odette said, "I know." Goldie said, "How do you know?" Odette said, "Because I have been reading that ledger since 1998. Goldie stared. Odette said, "I found it my third winter in this house. Otis had died some years before. Rowan was out on a service call. I was cleaning the barn. I found the ledger. I read it. I understood it. And then I put it back where I found it. Because I was young and I was not an Ashcroft yet, in the way this family means Ashcroft, and it was not mine to say. And I was not sure any Ashcroft was ever going to be ready to hear it." Goldie could not speak. Odette put a hand on her daughter's wrist. "Not tight, just there," Odette said. "I waited a long time for one of us to open it," Goldie said. "One of us," Odette said. "A daughter." They sat in the kitchen a long time. The television in the next room went to the weather. The weather said warm November. Warm November until it wasn't. The first cattle went into the standing corn on Friday morning. She strung the last of the 3-day wire at first light. She had done it alone. Osias Fenwick had not come back. Not since Wednesday. She had not expected him to come back. She had understood, sitting at that mailbox, that Osias Fenwick was not going to help her the way a man helps a girl. He was going to help her the way a man helps a woman doing the same work he had done. Which was to say, he was going to leave the tools, and he was going to watch, and he was going to come only when it was true. She had 8 head in the near lot. She opened the wire. She whistled the way her grandfather had taught her, low and short, and the 8 went out into the standing corn, and they did the thing every mocking neighbor said they would not do, which was, they dropped their heads, and they began. She stood at the wire and watched. Behind her, the truck came up the lane. Not Beau's, not Osias's, her mother's. Odette parked and got out and came and stood at the wire beside her daughter and did not say anything. She just watched. 2 women at a wire, watching 8 cattle harvest their own supper on their own 4 feet, on the ground of a woman whose name had not been said at this family's supper table in 64 years. Odette put her arm around Goldie's shoulders. Odette said, very quietly, "Let it stand," Goldie said. "Let the cows walk to their supper." They stood there. And down the county road, coming slow, headlights off in the gray morning, even though it was too dark for headlights off a green Chevy, from 1984 passed along the ridge above the West Quarter. The truck did not stop. But the driver lifted one finger off the wheel, the way men in this county lifted one finger off a wheel when they meant, "I see you." And she stood at the wire in her father's canvas jacket, and her great-grandmother's plan in her ribs, and her mother's arm around her shoulders, and $47,000 in a letter on the kitchen counter, and a Bo Halloran somewhere behind her already picking up the phone to tell somebody the Ashcroft girl had really gone and turned the cattle into the standing corn. And she did not know that morning at the wire that the ice was coming Sunday night, that the west face was going to lodge in the mud, that the herd would stand hungry at the wire 2 mornings later, bawling in the gray, that Bo Halloran would find out about the ice before she did and would drive out to the fence at dawn just to watch, that Osias Fenwick would come the second night with a weather chart in his coat pocket and change everything she thought she was doing, that her father would find the ledger on her kitchen table on Monday morning, that her father would sit down at the table and her father would cry for the first time since the tractor. She did not know any of that yet. She only knew that the cattle were eating and that the plan was working and that the woman who had drawn the map was not just her great-grandmother anymore. She was her. Sunday came in warm, warm the way November should not be warm. The kind of Sunday where a woman at church took her coat off in the pew and fanned herself with a bulletin. The kind where the men on the co-op porch said things like, "Well, I'll be, and I sure wasn't expecting this," and this beats sitting in a hunting stand shivering. Goldie went to church. She sat in the third pew from the back, where Ashcrofts had sat since her grandmother Elowen was a girl, Odette on her right, Rowan on her left in the aisle seat, because the aisle seat let his hip out easier when the service was over. Rowan had not spoken to her since Thursday supper. He was not speaking in the loud way. He was not speaking in the quiet way, which was worse. The preacher said something about patience. Goldie did not hear it. She heard the word patience, and then she heard nothing else because her mind was already at the west quarter walking the wire, counting rows, doing the math on 8 head across a 3-day face. Odette elbowed her. "Marigold." "Ma'am." "You're humming." "I wasn't." "You were." She had been humming. She had not known. Because a person who has been sleeping 4 hours a night for 6 weeks starts humming without knowing, which is a thing she would remember later, when it mattered. She stopped humming. The preacher went on. Bo Halloran was 2 pews up on the far side. Wife, 2 grown daughters home from college. Sunday coat, Sunday shave, Sunday hair. Bo Halloran at church looked like a picture of a man who had never once said sweetheart to a young woman at her own mailbox. He turned his head just once and he looked at her across the aisle. He smiled, the Sunday smile, which was worse than the mailbox smile, because the Sunday smile said, "I know something you don't know yet." She looked down at her hymnal. She did not know what Bo knew. She would find out. By supper. The wind changed at 4 in the afternoon. She was walking the fence with the spud bar over her shoulder because Osias had told her to walk the fence with the spud bar over her shoulder every afternoon just to know the feel of it. And she felt the wind change against the side of her face the way a person feels a door open in a house behind them. Warm, then not warm, then cold, then colder. She looked south. The sky south had gone the color of old lead. She said out loud to nobody, "Oh no." Because Winifred had written it in the margin of page 14. Warm November turns hard by supper time. She jogged back to the house. The radio in the kitchen was already going. Odette had the volume up. The regional weather woman said the words, "freezing rain," and Goldie's stomach did a small hard thing that felt like a fist inside a paper bag. Freezing rain first, then wet, heavy snow on top of it. The worst possible order. Because freezing rain glazes standing corn, ties the leaves shut, locks the ears, and wet snow on top loads the stalks. And wet snow on top of ice on standing corn is how you lodge a whole field in a night. And a lodged field in mud is worse than a burned field. Worse, because burned you can till. Lodged in mud is just rot. Odette said. Quiet. How much of it? Goldie said. How much of what? Odette said. How much of that field are you fixing to lose? Goldie said. I don't know yet, Odette said. Marigold, Goldie said. Ma, Odette said. Sit down. Goldie sat down. Odette said, Goldie ate, because there was nothing else to do until morning, because the wire was strung, the cattle were in the near lot, the barn was tight, the equipment was in. There was no chore she could go do that would move a single molecule of the storm coming down out of Canada at them. And that was a hard thing. That was a very hard thing. For a young woman who had run this farm on the doing of things for 2 years to sit at her mother's supper table doing nothing. Rowan came in from the porch. Rowan looked at the radio. Rowan looked at Goldie. Rowan did not say anything. Rowan sat down. Rowan ate his supper. And the freezing rain started at 7:42 that evening. Because Goldie looked at the clock, because a person who has been trained by Winifred Ashcroft's ledger to note, weather times had already gone to the clock the second she heard the first tick against the window. 7:42. Rain, then ice, then snow. Then the world went white and hard and slow and mean. By morning it was over. She was up before the light because she had never gone to bed. She had sat on the couch in her clothes with a quilt across her lap, and she had listened. To the rain, to the ice, to the snow, to the little cracking sounds a house makes when its skin is being frozen down to itself. She put her boots on at 5:40. She put the canvas jacket over the flannel. She took the flashlight. She took the spud bar. She went out. The world outside was glass. Every stalk in the front pasture was in a sleeve of ice. Every fence wire hung with beads. Every roof line dripping. The sun coming up over the east ridge caught the field and threw it back at her in a way that would have been beautiful, if she had not been about to lose it. The cattle were at the wire, all 8 of them, bawling. She could hear them from the house, because they had been in the standing corn face. First 3 days now, and they knew the shape of their supper, and this morning they could not find it. Because the ice had glazed the ears shut. Because the crust on the ground was hard enough to walk on a woman's boot without breaking. And because the West End, she stood at the crown of the hill and she looked at the West End and she said, out loud, to the whole cold morning, no. Because a wide strip of the West Quarter was flat, not standing, flat, lodged into the mud under the ice under the snow. Corn broken at the second joint, ears down in the muck, stalks laid over each other in a mat you could have walked on. 90 yards of it, maybe 120. She stood there with the spud bar in her hand, and she remembered. She remembered opening a wide face to the wind. She remembered Winifred's line she had skimmed past in February. She remembered. She said, out loud, to Winifred, to Otis, to the whole long, silent kitchen wall of her family. I did the thing you said not to do. The cattle bawled. Nobody answered. Down the road a horn honked. Not Osias. Osias did not honk. Bo Halloran's white Ford at the top of her lane, idling, windows up. Bo in the driver's seat with a coffee thermos in one hand, not getting out, just watching. She could not see his smile from where she stood, but she could feel it. She could feel the whole shape of that smile the way a person feels a hand on the back of her neck. She stood in the field with the spud bar, and a young woman 3 years out of a state college classroom looked at a lodged West Quarter in a bawling herd, in a mortgage due in March, in a Bo Halloran in an idling truck at the top of her lane. And she thought, just for a second, just for the length of a single ragged breath in the cold, maybe he was right. Maybe I ruined it. Then she picked the spud bar up off her shoulder, and she went to the wire, and she started breaking the crust. Because the herd was hungry, because if she stood there thinking she would think herself into a hole she could not climb out of, because the doing of a thing is the only thing that has ever gotten an Ashcroft up a hill. She broke the crust for 2 hours. 2 hours, at the front face, alone. She broke down to the first row of standing ears the cattle could reach, and she pushed the wire back a foot, and she let them in, and they dropped their heads, and they ate. They did not know she had lost the West End. They did not know the wire had been strung wrong 6 weeks ago by a young woman who had skimmed a margin. They just knew the ice was off the ears, and they ate. She sat down in the snow when they were eating, not from tired, from something else. Because there is a kind of tired that is tired, and there is a kind of tired that is a young woman who has been carrying a family from behind a curtain for 2 years and just realized she may have dropped it. She sat in the snow. She did not cry. She had not cried since her grandfather Elias died. She was not going to start today. She said to Winifred in her head, "What now?" Winifred did not answer. Winifred had been 64 years quiet. Winifred was not about to start today either. Beau's truck was gone from the top of the lane by the time she walked back. Somebody would tell him at the co-op by lunch. Somebody would. Because there was always a somebody. She came in the back door. She took the boots off at the mat. She washed her hands. She was still holding the spud bar. She set the spud bar in the corner by the door. And she looked up, and her father was sitting at the kitchen table. And on the table in front of him, open-faced up, was the blue leather ledger. She had left it there last night. She had left it there because she had been sitting with it after supper, trying to work out what to move in the wire on Monday. And then the radio had started with the freezing rain warning, and she had gone to the window and she had forgotten about the ledger, the way a person forgets about a thing when a bigger thing lands on top of it. And she had forgotten it on the kitchen table. And now her father had it open in front of him. And her father was not looking at her. Her father was looking at the handwriting. Rowan Ashcroft's face was gray, which is a hard color to describe, which is a color a face gets when a piece of information has just gone in through the eyes and has landed somewhere behind the ribs and has not yet worked out what to do with itself. He said, without looking up, "Whose is this?" She said, "Sit down, Daddy." He said, "I am sitting down." She said, "I know." He said, "Whose is this?" She said, "Winifred's." He said, "Winifred who?" She said, "Grandma Winifred." He said, "My grandmother." She said, "Yes, sir." He said, "This is a plan." She said, "Yes, sir." He said, "This is a plan for wintering cattle on standing corn." She said, "Yes, sir." Rowan Ashcroft closed the ledger, not fast, slow, the way a man closes a Bible after he has read a passage that has hurt him. He put his hand flat on the cover. He looked up at his daughter for the first time in 3 days. He said, "Where did you find this?" She said, "In the rafters of the hip roof barn, under the tarp, last February." He said, "Under the tarp." She said, "Yes, sir." He said, "How many?" She said, "One." He said, "Just one." She said, "Just this one." He said, "How many did she keep?" She said, "I don't know." He said, "She kept a lot of them." She said, "Ma said she did." He said, "Your ma knew." She said, "She's known a long time." Rowan closed his eyes. Not tears yet, just closed. The way a man closes his eyes when he has just been told his wife and his daughter and his grandmother he barely remembered have all been having a conversation he was not invited to, for his own good, for a long time. He said, very quietly, "Marigold." She said, "Sir," he said, "sit down." She sat down. He said, "Your granddaddy Elias." She said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Your granddaddy Elias burned every one of these ledgers in the fall of 1963. She stared at him. She said, "How do you know that?" He said, "Because I watched him do it. I was 5 years old. He put them in the burn barrel behind the machine shed. All of them," he said. "Boys don't need to know a woman's business," he said. "This is what got her killed." He said, "That was the last time he said her name in this house." She could not move. He said, I have known that for close to 50 years. She said, 50. He said, I found out when my daddy was dying. He told me, in the hospital room, in 79, he said, Rowan, there was one your granddaddy did not find, under the tarp in the hip roof. She hid it there before she died. She told me where. I never went and got it. Rowan, if it is still there, do with it what you will. But I have not been the man to touch it, she said. Daddy, he said, I did not touch it. She said, Daddy, he said, I told myself every winter, I told myself, I will go up there this spring. I will go up there and I will take it down and I will read it and I will honor her. And every spring, honey, I did not. Because every spring I told myself I would do it the next spring. Because reading it would have meant looking at what my daddy did with a burn barrel. And I could not look. Because he was my daddy. And he was already dead. And a boy does not want to know his daddy was wrong about a woman. He put his forehead down on the ledger. And he cried. Rowan Ashcroft, 68 years old, rod in his hip, could not climb into a combine anymore. Cried at his kitchen table. Onto the cover of a book his grandmother wrote before she died. While his daughter, 21 years old, sat across from him and did not know what to do with her hands. Odette came into the kitchen from the hallway. She had heard from the top of the stairs. She stood at the doorway and she did not come any closer because she understood what Goldie did not yet understand, which was that this was not a scene for a wife to fix. This was a scene for a father and a daughter and a burned barrel and a grandmother and a rafter. And a wife did not belong in it. Not yet. Not until the crying was done. Odette waited. Rowan cried the way an Ashcroft man cries. Which is to say, very briefly, and with a great deal of it going on inside where nobody could see, and then a wipe of the eyes with the back of the hand, and then a nod to the daughter, which said, All right, I am here now, he said. How much of the field did we lose, she said. The West End, maybe an acre and a quarter, he said. That's not nothing, she said. I strung the wire wrong, he said. You strung it the way a girl strings it who read a plan once, she said. I skipped the margin, he said. So did I, my whole life. So did I. He put his hand out across the table. She put her hand in his. Because he had not held her hand across this table since she was 6 years old, Odette said from the doorway, very quietly. Rowan, he said, without looking. Come sit down, Odette. Odette came and sat down. 3 Ashcrofts at a supper table with a dead woman's ledger between them. And that was Monday. She slept 11 hours that night. Not because everything was fixed. Because it was not fixed. The West End was still lodged. The cattle would still be at the wire in the morning. The 47,000 was still due. Beau Halloran was still at the top of the lane in his mind laughing, and there was no way to unlaugh him. But Rowan knew now, and Odette had a hand on her back all night without saying so. And the ledger was in the middle of the kitchen table where it belonged. She slept because for the first time in 2 years, she was not carrying it by herself. Tuesday she went back out and broke the crust. She had 8 heads still on a shrinking face and a lodged West End going soft in the sun. She broke ice. She led the cattle a little further. She counted the ears they could still reach. She did math in her head that did not add up. 2 more days, maybe 3. Then she would be out of standing forage on this strip, and the whole plan would come down to whether the arithmetic could hold on hay for the 8 weeks between now and green-up. It could not hold on hay, not at this year's prices. She sat in the barn at dusk with her feet in the same spot her grandfather had put his feet on the last winter he was alive. And she said out loud to nobody, I need help. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She almost did not look at it. She looked at it. The screen said, Farmers State Bank. She stared at the screen. She let it buzz. Because a bank at 7:30 in the evening was not a bank. It was a signal. She let it go to voicemail. She stood up. She said to the empty barn, All right, the way her mother had said it in the kitchen the first time. The way a woman says all right in a barn at the end of a day when the world has just told her the day is not over. Wednesday, she got a different call. Miss Junie Marsh. Miss Junie was 91 years old, and she had run the county library from 1952 until 1998. She still went in 3 mornings a week. She still knew where every book in the archive was without looking at the shelf. And she still called people on the telephone at 7 in the morning because in Miss Junie's world, 7 in the morning was the middle of the day. Miss Junie said, "Marigold," Goldie said. "Yes, ma'am." Miss Junie said, "Come to the library," Goldie said. "Ma'am," Miss Junie said. "I have something of your great-grandmother's," Goldie said. "Ma'am," Miss Junie said. "Come this morning, before 10. The reading room is empty until 10. She hung up. Miss Junie always hung up. Goldie stood in the kitchen holding the phone. She said, out loud, "How?" Because how did Miss Junie know she was reading Winifred's ledger? Because she had told nobody except her mother and Osias Fenwick. Because Osias did not tell, except Osias had a mother once. And Osias's mother, Wilma, had told Odette the story sitting at Wilma's kitchen table before Odette married in. And Wilma was gone now. But Wilma had had a best friend. And Wilma's best friend had been Junie Marsh. She put the phone down. She put her coat on. She drove to town. The library was the old Carnegie building on the square. Red brick, green trim. 2 limestone lions on the steps that had been chipped at the ears since 1890-something. She had been coming in here since she was 4 years old and had never once looked at the lions the way she looked at them this morning. Because whatever Miss Junie had been sitting behind those lions the whole time. Miss Junie was in the reading room. Small woman, white hair set the way a country woman sets her hair. A cardigan the color of a cardinal, reading glasses pushed up onto her forehead. Both hands flat on the reading table over a small stack of blue leather. Small stack, not one. Small stack. She counted with her eyes. 3. 3 more ledgers, Miss Junie said, without looking up. Sit down, honey. She sat down. Miss Junie said, "Your great-grandmother kept 10 ledgers, 1952 through 1962. 10 winters," Goldie said. "I have one," Miss Junie said. "Yes, ma'am, the 61. That's the one she hid in the rafter. She told my mother she was going to hide it because it was the year she meant to try the method in earnest. She did not know Otis was going to say no. She just wanted a copy safe," Goldie said. "Where are the other 6? Miss Junie said. "2 of them are here, 58 and 59. She gave them to my mother Wilma the year I was 13. Wilma gave them to me before she died. I have kept them in the fireproof cabinet in the archive since 1978, Goldie said. "That's 3, including mine," Miss Junie said. "Yes, ma'am," Goldie said. "Where are the other 7? Miss Junie said. "Your grandfather Elias burned them in 1963, Goldie said. "I know," Miss Junie said. "He thought he burned all of them," Goldie said. "He didn't," Miss Junie said. "No, he did not." She put her hand on the top ledger. Miss Junie slid her hand out from under it. Miss Junie said, "There is a thing your daddy does not know, and your grandmother did not know, and your great-granddaddy Otis went to his grave not knowing. And I am going to tell you, because I promised your great-grandmother in the summer of 1962, when she came in to return a copy of Willa Cather's My Antonia, which she never finished, because she died a few months after." Goldie held very still. Miss Junie said, "Your great-grandmother did not invent the standing corn grazing method," Goldie said. "What?" Miss Junie said. "She learned it from her mother," Goldie said. "From," Miss Junie said, "from your great-great-grandmother, Fern Ashcroft. Fern homesteaded this ground in 1901. Fern wintered cattle on standing corn every hard winter from 1903 to 1929. Fern taught Winifred when Winifred was 11 years old." Goldie could not breathe. Miss Junie opened the 58 ledger. Miss Junie turned to the front page. In the front, in a hand older and shakier than Winifred's, an inscription. Passed from Fern to Winifred, the winter I turned 60. May you go on doing what our men will not. She stared at it. She stared for a full minute. Because. Because it was not one woman. It was two. Because it was not 64 years of silence. It was over 100. Because there had been a Fern Ashcroft on this ground before there had been a bank on the county road. Before there had been a paved road. Before there had been a Halloran within 20 miles. And Fern had wintered cattle on standing corn. And Fern had taught Winifred. And Winifred had died. And Winifred's son Elias had burned the ledgers. And Elias's son Rowan had not gone to the rafter. And Rowan's daughter Marigold had gone to the rafter. Because somebody had to, Miss Junie said. It jumps generations, honey. It always does. Goldie looked up. Miss Junie said, the women who keep this kind of knowing, they do not always get to give it to their own daughters. Sometimes their daughters marry men who do not want to hear it. Sometimes their daughters are afraid. Sometimes their daughters die. And the knowing waits, in a rafter, in a fireproof cabinet, in a library, in an old woman's kitchen. It waits for the granddaughter or the great-granddaughter or the great-great-granddaughter. Goldie said, how did you know it was going to be me? Miss Junie said. I did not, Goldie said. Then, Miss Junie said, Wilma told me on her deathbed, she said, Junie, if any Ashcroft girl ever asks you about wintering ground, you give her the ledgers, whichever girl that is. And I said, all right, Wilma. And Wilma died. And I have been sitting at that fireproof cabinet for 48 years waiting for an Ashcroft girl, Goldie said. You waited 48 years, Miss Junie said. Honey, that is not the longest wait in this story, Goldie said. What is? Miss Junie said. Osias Fenwick has been waiting 65, Goldie said. Osias, Miss Junie said. Osias will come to your barn tonight or tomorrow. He will bring a weather chart, and he will bring an old photograph, and you will let him in, and you will listen to what he says, because there is a piece of this you do not have yet, and it is not mine to tell, it is his. Miss Junie closed the 58 ledger. She pushed the 3 ledgers across the reading table to Goldie. She said, these are yours, Goldie said. Miss Junie. Miss Junie said, yes, ma'am, Goldie said. Thank you, Miss Junie said. Don't thank me. Take them home. Read them. Do what your great-great-grandmother said. Do what your great-grandmother could not. Goldie stood up. She said, Miss Junie. Miss Junie said, yes, ma'am, Goldie said. Was Fern a good farmer? Miss Junie smiled. First smile of the morning. Miss Junie said, Fern was the best farmer this county ever had. Ask any man who won't say her name. She carried the ledgers out to her truck. She sat in the truck in the library lot for 10 minutes without turning the key. Because a person needs 10 minutes. When she has just learned that everything she has been doing has been done by her family for over 100 years, in secret, against the men who married in. 10 minutes is not enough, but 10 minutes is what she had. Then she drove home. The green Chevy was in the lane when she got there. Osias Fenwick was on the porch step. He stood up when she pulled in. He said, Miss Marigold, she said. Mr. Fenwick, he said. I have a chart, she said. I heard, he said. You heard from who? She said. Miss Junie, he said. Then she has told you what you needed to hear from her. She said, yes, sir, he said. I have something to tell you that she could not. She said, come inside. He came inside. Odette was in the kitchen. Rowan was at the table. Neither of them said anything when Osias came in. Because there was a way in this county a house went quiet when Osias Fenwick came in. Because Osias did not make small talk. Because if Osias was in your kitchen, it was because something needed to be said. Osias sat down. He took his hat off. He put it on the empty chair. He took a folded paper out of his coat pocket and he set it on the table. A weather chart, not the phone kind, the old kind. Printed off a computer at the extension office in town. Numbers in a grid, he said. Arctic freeze coming in behind this storm. Wednesday night through the following Friday. 10 days, low of -18, wind chill -32. Rowan whistled through his teeth. Osias said, Miss Marigold, Goldie said. Yes, sir, Osias said. Your West End that lodged, Goldie said. Yes, sir, Osias said. That freeze will lock it hard, cleaner than a bin. If you portion it right, you will feed on the lodge corn all the way through February. Goldie stared at him. She said, It's not lost, Osias said. No, ma'am, not if the freeze holds, which it will. This is a real one, she said. How do you know it will? Osias said. Because I have been watching this county's Novembers for 70 years, and this is what they do when they come like this, Rowan said quietly. 70 years, Osias said. Sir, Rowan said. You knew my grandmother, Osias said. Yes, sir, Rowan said. I did not know that, Osias said. No, sir, I did not tell you. She did not want me to, Rowan said. Osias, Osias said. Sir, Rowan said. Why? Osias took the second thing out of his coat pocket. An old photograph, black and white, cracked at one corner. Two people in it. A woman about 40 in a dark dress, braid down her back. A boy about 7 in overalls beside her. In a cornfield. Standing corn. The boy holding the woman's hand. He set it on the table. He said, That is your grandmother in 1961, and that is me. Goldie stared at the photograph, because the boy in the picture was Osias Fenwick, and the woman was Winifred. And Winifred had her hand around a 7-year-old Osias's hand. Osias said, Winifred Ashcroft was my father's aunt, Goldie said. Your, Osias said. My daddy was Vernon Fenwick. Vernon's mother was Delphine Ashcroft. Delphine was Winifred's older sister, Goldie said. So, Osias said. So Winifred was my great-aunt by blood, Goldie said. We are family, Osias said. Distant cousins, yes, ma'am, Rowan said. Quiet. I did not know that either. Osias said. No, sir. Elias made sure of it. When your daddy burned the ledgers, he did not just burn ledgers. He burned the whole shape of who your grandmother knew. He did not let her people come to her funeral. My mother Wilma tried. My mother was turned away at the church door. That is why my mother told your mother the story before you married in. Because she was still angry, 60 years later. Rowan closed his eyes. Osias said, Winifred taught me to graze corn when I was 7. She stood me in a strip on the West Quarter and she said, Osias, someday an Ashcroft girl is going to find my ledger in the rafter, and you are going to be the one who tells her the West End will hold in a freeze, because I will not be alive to tell her myself. Osias looked at Goldie. He said, I have been driving down your fence line every morning for 2 weeks, Goldie said. I know, he said, because a promise made to a woman in a strip of standing corn in the fall of 1961 is a promise, and I do not have that many years left to keep it in. Rowan put his hand over his mouth. Odette said, Osias. Osias said, Ma'am, Odette said. Sit and eat with us, Osias said. I would be glad to. That night, Rowan Ashcroft, rod in his hip, walked out to the West Quarter. Not fast, not steady. He walked with a cane on the left and a spud bar in his right hand as a second cane. He walked from the yard to the crown of the hill, and he stopped, and he looked at his 40 acres of standing corn under moonlight and ice. He looked at the lodged West End. He looked at the wire strung in three-day strips down the length of the field. He looked at his daughter walking a strip ahead of the cattle, cracking the crust so the herd could drop their heads to the ears. He said out loud to nobody, to Winifred, to Fern, to Wilma, to Delphine, to every woman on this ground since 1901 who had not been said out loud by an Ashcroft man. He said, "I'm sorry." The wind took it. The wind did not care about apologies. But somewhere ahead of him in the third strip down, Goldie stopped. Because she had heard. She did not turn. She kept walking. She kept breaking crust. And behind her, her father set the spud bar down in the frozen ground, and he began the slow, long walk down the hill to the wire. To help her. For the first time since April. 2 Aprils ago, the Arctic freeze came in Wednesday night, -18 by supper time, -32 wind chill by 10. The lodged corn locked hard. The standing corn stayed dry inside its ice sleeve. The cattle came out at first light, every morning, down the strip, fat, calm. Somewhere down the county road at a big clean feedlot, with a lit sign that said, "Halloran Feed," a man with a cell phone in his hand looked out at his own haystack, and he did the math a man does when he has been going to the wrong bank meeting for 6 months. And he did not sleep either. And a young woman in a caramel canvas jacket with wisps loose at her temples, and a father coming down the hill behind her, and a great-grandmother in her ribs, and a great-great-grandmother. She had never heard the name of a week ago now, living in her chest like a second heart, walked ahead of 40 head of cattle in a strip of standing corn, cracking the crust, cracking the crust, cracking the crust. And she said without turning to her father behind her, "Let it stand." And Rowan Ashcroft at 68 on a rod in his hip said back, "Let the cows walk to their supper." January came in the color of galvanized steel. The county woke up on the 2nd of the month to 12 inches of new snow on top of the freeze. Roads closed, schools out. The AM radio out of the next county saying the words hay shortage and unprecedented, and the extension office was recommending sell-off if you cannot lock in a supplier. Sell-off, meaning slaughter your herd at auction, at the bottom of the price, because you could not feed them, meaning the arithmetic that Goldie had done at her kitchen table in February had come true. In a way, she had never wanted it to come true, because she had not wanted it to come true on anybody, because she had not been raised to want a hard winter for her neighbors, even a Beau Halloran neighbor, especially maybe a Beau Halloran neighbor, because there is a kind of tired that gets tired of being laughed at, but there is another kind of tired underneath it, that is just tired of watching men lose. She was up at 4:30 every morning. She broke crust with her spud bar in her right hand, and her father broke crust with a spud bar in his right hand 15 feet behind her. And Osias Fenwick came at first light on Tuesdays and Thursdays and helped them shift the wire down by 3 days. Osias said one thing on the second Tuesday. Osias said, "They are fat," Rowan said. "Yes, sir," Osias said. "It is going to hold to March," Rowan said. "Yes, sir," Osias said. "You are going to make it, sir," Rowan said. "Yes, sir, I am." That was the whole conversation. But something in Rowan's shoulders came down about an inch after Osias said it. And an inch is not much, except when you have been carrying a hip and a mortgage and a granddaddy's burn barrel on those shoulders for 2 years, in which case an inch is the whole world. Goldie kept walking crust. She did not turn back to see her father. She did not need to. She could hear the specific small crunch a spud bar made behind her when a man swung it with his hip, working right for the first time in 21 months. She heard it, and she did not say a thing about it. Because that is how you say a thing in this county, by not saying it. By the second week of January, the cattle were fatter than any herd in the county. She knew this because she was moving them out for water on Thursday morning, and Wendell Corliss drove by on the county road and slowed his truck and rolled his window down and did not say anything and rolled his window back up and drove on, which for Wendell Corliss was practically a standing ovation. She also knew this because on Friday morning, a reporter from the county paper called the house. Not a big paper, a tiny paper. The Bledsoe County Register, weekly, circulation about 1100, run by a woman named Prudence Talbot, who had been running it since her husband died in '97, and who was very fond of stories about young people doing things older people had forgotten how to do. Prudence said, on the phone, to Odette, who then said to Goldie, Prudence said, Marigold, I hear you kept a whole herd off hay this winter, Goldie said. Yes, ma'am, Prudence said. May I come out and take a picture? Goldie said. Wait, let me think. Because a picture in the Bledsoe County Register would go up on the little bulletin board at the feed store, and then it would go up on the little bulletin board at the co-op, and then it would end up on somebody's Facebook page. And Facebook pages did what Facebook pages did, and Goldie was not sure she wanted that. Because a picture is a thing that can be pulled at by hands other than the hands that made the picture. She said, Ma'am, could I call you back? Prudence said, You call me back, honey. I am at this desk until 3. Goldie hung up. She stood in the kitchen. She said, out loud, to nobody. Should I? Odette said from the sink. Should you what? Goldie said. Let her come, Odette said. That is not my decision to make, honey, Goldie said. Ma, Odette said. It is not, Goldie said. I don't know, Odette said. Then wait. If you don't know, wait. Wait was the right answer in November. It might be the right answer in January. Goldie waited. She called Prudence at 2:50. She said, Ma'am, not this week, maybe not any week, but if I decide otherwise, you will be the first. Prudence said, Fair enough, honey. Prudence hung up. Odette said at the sink without looking up. You did the right thing, Goldie said. I don't know if I did, Odette said. You did, Goldie said. How do you know? Odette said. Because your great-grandmother did not want a picture either. Goldie did not answer that. Because she had not thought about Winifred at a supper table in her own kitchen with a newspaper woman across from her. But now that she was thinking about it, she thought Winifred would have said, Ma'am, no thank you. And a great-great-grandmother named Fern would have said the same. And a Wilma Fenwick, who had been kept out of a funeral in 1962, would have said the same. The women in this line did not want a picture. They wanted the ground. They wanted to be believed. They wanted their daughters to walk crust in front of their own herds. They did not want a picture. She went out to break crust. The picture came anyway. Somebody's cousin's neighbor drove by the fence on a Sunday afternoon with a phone in her hand, and she took the picture through the truck window, and she posted it to a Facebook group called Small Farms Real Talk that had about 42,000 members. And she wrote under the picture, Young woman over in Bledsoe County wintered her whole herd on standing corn while the rest of us are selling off. Some things the old people knew are worth remembering. She did not use Goldie's name, but she did not have to, because the picture was Goldie in her caramel canvas jacket at the wire, bare skin gone pink with cold, wisps of hair loose at her temples, a spud bar over her shoulder, and behind her 40 head of cattle fat on standing corn in 10 inches of new snow. The picture did what pictures do. By Wednesday night, it had 11,000 shares. By Thursday morning, the Nashville Tennessean had picked it up. By Thursday afternoon, a farm podcast man in Missouri had called the house. By Friday morning, a segment producer at a national morning show had called the house. Odette answered every phone call the same way. Odette said, Thank you for calling. We are not doing interviews at this time. And she hung up. And Rowan from the recliner watching a game with the sound off said one time on Friday. Rowan said, Do you want to? Goldie said. Not really, Rowan said. All right. That was the whole conversation about the Nashville Tennessean, except one call was different. The call was different because the caller did not ask for an interview. The caller asked for a meeting. The caller was a woman from a company called Kernwell Ag, which Goldie had heard of because everybody had heard of Kernwell Ag. Because Kernwell Ag ran feedlots in 6 states and had a research division and a licensing arm and a lobbying arm and a legal department the size of a small county. The woman was very pleasant. The woman said her name was something Goldie did not catch because Goldie was fumbling to write down the number in case she needed to call back. But the woman said something about a meeting in Nashville at Kernwell's regional office and a package and a licensing arrangement and a consulting contract. The woman said, "It would be a substantial number," Goldie said. "Ma'am," the woman said. "In the 6-figure range," Goldie said. "Ma'am," the woman said. "We would fly you out," Goldie said. "Ma'am, I have to break crust in the morning." The woman laughed. Which was the wrong laugh. It was a laugh a person gives when they think a person has just said a charming thing. And breaking crust in the morning was not a charming thing. It was the reason a herd was fat. Goldie said, "Ma'am, may I call you back?" The woman said, "Please do, Marigold. This is a time-sensitive matter." Goldie hung up. She stood in the kitchen. She said out loud, 6 figures. Because $47,000. Because a banknote. Because a hip. Because a father who was walking again. Because she had just been offered enough money to fix everything on the farm at once by a woman who called her Marigold in a voice like she already owned it. Odette said from the doorway. "Who was that?" Goldie said. "Kernwell Ag," Odette said. "Nothing," Odette said, very quietly. "What do they want?" Goldie said. "The method," Odette said. "Fern's method," Goldie said. "Yes, ma'am," Odette said. "And they will pay you," Goldie said. 6 figures, Odette said. "Sit down at the table, honey." Goldie sat down. Odette sat down across from her. Odette said, "You do what you feel is right," Goldie said. "Ma," Odette said, "you do what you feel is right, but I will tell you what Wilma Fenwick told me in her kitchen a long time ago." Wilma said, "Some knowing is for keeping, and some knowing is for giving away. Sales is neither of those. Sales is a third thing. Sales is a fence around the knowing. And a fence around the knowing means everybody who does not own the fence has to pay to get through it," Goldie said. "Ma," Odette said, "Fern did not put a fence around the knowing. Winifred did not put a fence around the knowing. Wilma did not put a fence around the knowing. Junie has kept 2 ledgers in a fireproof cabinet for 48 years without a fence around them. Osias drove your fence line for 2 weeks without a fence around the knowing," Goldie said. "But the mortgage," Odette said. "Honey," Goldie said. "Ma, the mortgage," Odette said. "You will pay the mortgage," Goldie said. "How?" Odette said. "The way your great-great-grandmother paid hers," Goldie said. "How?" Odette said. "By feeding cattle." Goldie put her forehead down on the ledger on the table. "The blue leather. Winifred's book." She said out loud to the leather, to the woman inside it. "All right, then." She called Kernwell Ag back the next morning. She said, "Ma'am, thank you for the offer." The woman said, "Oh, good. When can we fly you out?" Goldie said, "I'm not going to sell you the method," the woman said. "Marigold," Goldie said. "Ma'am," the woman said, "do you understand what a 6-figure licensing package could do for your operation?" Goldie said. "Yes, ma'am, I do," the woman said. "And you're saying no?" Goldie said. "Yes, ma'am," the woman said. "May I ask why?" Goldie said. "Because it is not mine to sell." The woman said. "It is on your ground," Goldie said. "It is on my ground because a woman named Fern homesteaded it in 1901 and taught it to her daughter Winifred, who taught it to her nephew Osias, who kept it. And Junie Marsh has been keeping 2 ledgers of it in the library archive for 48 years. None of them charged anybody a dime. I am not going to be the one who breaks that," the woman said. "Marigold," Goldie said. "Ma'am," the woman said. I understand, which surprised her, because because a company like Kernwell was not supposed to understand. But the woman on the phone said, "May I ask you something else?" Goldie said. "Yes, ma'am," the woman said. "Are you willing to write it up? Not for us, for the public. If we underwrote a print run through your county extension, no license, no exclusivity, just a booklet with your family's method and your family's story on the cover. Fern and Winifred and you. Free to any farmer who asked." Goldie stood in her kitchen with the phone against her ear. She said, "Ma'am," the woman said, "I know how this sounds coming from a company like ours," Goldie said. "Yes, ma'am," the woman said. "My grandmother wintered cattle on standing corn in western Kansas from 1941 to 1968. My grandmother's ledgers are in a shoebox in my attic. Nobody has read them but me. I have worked at Kernwell for 11 years. I have wanted to do a thing like this for 8 of them. Your picture came across my desk on Wednesday. I sat with it a long time. I made this call myself, not through the licensing department," Goldie said. "Ma'am," the woman said, "you are welcome to say no. I will not be offended," Goldie said. "What's your name?" the woman said. "Roselle Hathaway," Goldie said. "Roselle," Roselle said. "Yes," Goldie said. "Could you and me write it together? You and me and Miss Junie and Osias Fenwick," Roselle said. "I would like that very much." Goldie hung up. She stood in the kitchen. She said out loud, "Well, because sometimes a fence in the road turns out to be a gate. And sometimes the woman on the other side of it has been waiting on you to open it." Bo Halloran came to the fence on a Wednesday morning at the end of January. Not in his good truck, not in the coat, not the Sunday hair, an old brown coat that had actually been in a hog lot. Boots muddied at the toe, face 2 days unshaved, hat in his hand, which Goldie noticed before she noticed him, because Bo Halloran's hat had been on his head every time she had ever seen him, even in church. He stood at the wire. He waited. He did not call out. She walked over. She had the spud bar over her shoulder because she always had the spud bar over her shoulder these days. She stopped 6 feet from the wire. She did not put the spud bar down. He said, "Marigold," she said. "Mr. Halloran," he said. "Bo," she said. "Mr. Halloran." He nodded. "All right," he said. "I sold 67 head at the sale barn Monday." She said. "Nothing," he said. "I lost 74 cents a pound on them." She said. "Nothing," he said. "I have 31 left. I cannot buy hay. I cannot make it to March on 31 head at hay prices." She said. "Nothing," he said. "My daddy told me when I was 10 years old." He said, "Boy, there will always be some Ashcroft too soft to make a farm work in this county." He said, "When you see the softness in an Ashcroft, you go put your hand on the deed. That is how a Halloran gets ahead." He said, "That is what my daddy said to me." She said, "Nothing," he said. "I said the same to my son last May. When your daddy's rehab bills went to collections and I heard about it, I said the same words to my son." Goldie held the spud bar. He said, "I have hated your family for 30 years." She said, "Nothing." He said, "My daddy hated your granddaddy." She said, "Nothing." He said, "My granddaddy hated your great-granddaddy Otis." She said, "Why?" He said, "Because your great-granddaddy Otis took a loan from my granddaddy in 1938 and did not pay it off till 1951. And every year in between, my granddaddy carried the paper on your family and did not foreclose. And when Otis paid it off, he never once thanked my granddaddy in a public way. Just sent the last check with a note that said paid in full. My granddaddy carried that little slip of paper in his wallet till the day he died, because he had wanted a thank you, and he had gotten a receipt," Goldie said. "So," he said, "so when a Halloran sees a wounded Ashcroft, he does not ask if the Ashcroft is all right. He asks if the Ashcroft is ready to be bought, because we do not owe you a kindness. My granddaddy has told me that all my life, she said. Nothing. He said, I was wrong. Marigold. She said, nothing. He said, I was wrong at your mailbox in October. I was wrong at the top of your lane on the morning of the ice. I was wrong at church every Sunday of this fall when I looked at your family like I looked at your family. She said, nothing. He said, I have 31 head. She said, how much standing corn is left? He said, none. I combined mine second week of October like everybody else. She said, I know, I saw. He said, I am not asking you for money. She said, all right. He said, I am asking you if there is any standing corn left on that west end I could turn my 31 head into. For the last 6 weeks of winter, I would pay you, she said. How much? He said. Whatever you say. She stood at the wire with the spud bar over her shoulder. She thought, just for a moment, she thought about her great-granddaddy Otis, who had gotten a loan from a Halloran and had never thanked him in public, and who had also burned nothing, and who had not stopped his own wife from working out the wintering plan by punishing her memory when she died. She thought about her granddaddy Elias, who had burned the ledgers and who had turned Wilma away at the church door. She thought about Rowan on the hill in the dark saying he was sorry. She thought about a receipt in a wallet. She thought, all right, she said. Mr. Halloran, he said. Bo, she said. Bo, he said. Yes, she said. I have enough standing corn on the west end for maybe another 50 head for the 6 weeks, because the freeze locked the lodged rows in cleaner than a bin, he said. Yes, ma'am, she said. You can bring your 31 head over Monday morning. He said. How much? She said. Neighbor rate. He said. Marigold. She said. Neighbor rate. He said. That is not. She said. Bo. He said. Yes. She said. That is what my great-grandmother would have offered your great-grandfather in 1938. If it had been the other way around, and she had been asked, he said. How do you know? She said, because she wrote in her ledger. He said, she wrote about my family. She said, she wrote about a lot of families. He said, in her ledger. She said, yes. He said, and she said, she said, if a Halloran ever comes hungry to my wire feed his herd at neighbor rate. Because a hungry man at your wire is a neighbor no matter what his daddy did. He looked away. The county road behind him was empty. The corn behind her was quiet. He wiped at his face with the back of his glove. He said, all right then, she said. All right, he said. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me, thank her, he said. How? She said. I don't know yet. She's been dead a long time, he said. I could say her name, she said. Say it, he said. Winifred, she said. That's the first thing, he said. What's the second? She said. There isn't one yet. You said the first. That's enough for today. He put his hat back on. He walked to his truck. He drove. She stood at the wire. She said out loud to the corn, You heard that, Winnie? The corn rattled once, which was probably just the wind, but which she took the other way. Because a person is allowed to take a thing the other way, sometimes. The banker called on a Thursday morning at 8 o'clock, not the 7:30 man, the bank president, whose name was Ernie Boyette, who had been the president of Farmer State Bank since 1994, who had known Rowan since Rowan was a boy, who had known Elias, who had known Otis at the very end of Otis's life. Ernie said, Rowan, Rowan said. Ernie, Ernie said. Your daughter, Rowan said. Yes, Ernie said. That picture went everywhere, Rowan said. Yes, Ernie said. Board met last night, Rowan said. All right, Ernie said. We are extending your note. 12 months, no new terms, no penalty, No interest bump, just an extension, Rowan said. Nothing, Ernie said. Rowan, are you there? Rowan said. Yes, Ernie said. Board voted unanimous, Rowan said. Why? Ernie said. Because your daughter kept 40 head off hay through the worst winter this county has seen in 15 years. And because we would like to be able to say in 10 years, we did not foreclose on the family that showed the county how to do it, Rowan said. Ernie said. Yes, Rowan said. Thank you, Ernie said. Don't thank me, thank her. Rowan hung up. He sat in the chair with the phone in his hand for a full minute. Then he called Goldie's name. Goldie came in from the porch, cold on her face, snow on her sleeves. He said, Sit down, Marigold. She sat. He said, The bank extended the note. She said, How much? He said, 12 months, no penalty. She said, 12 months. He said, 12 months. She said, Nothing. Because she had been walking crust with a spud bar for 39 mornings. Because she had been carrying a $47,000 number in the back of her head like a small hot stone. Because a 12-month extension was a spring, was a summer, was a fall, was another chance to plant standing corn on the West End, was a whole year. She put her hands flat on the table. Rowan said, Marigold, she said. Sir. He said, You did it. She said, We did it. He said, Marigold. She said, Sir. He said, I said what I said. You did it. She said, All right, which is all a person can say sometimes. The booklet went to print in April. 28 pages, blue cover, line drawing of a woman and a girl standing at a wire in a field of standing corn. Roselle Hathaway had paid for the design out of her own account. Kernwell had underwritten the print run for the county extension office. No logo, no fine print, no trademark, just the words on the cover. Wintering Ground, a family method for standing corn cattle grazing. By Fern Ashcroft, Winifred Ashcroft, and Marigold Ashcroft. With notes by Osias Fenwick and Junie Marsh. The first print run was 5,000 copies. They gave them away. 6 other counties in the region asked for a run of their own by the end of the summer. 2 farm colleges asked for permission to reprint. An old professor emeritus at Iowa State wrote a letter to Goldie that said, Miss Ashcroft, I taught animal science for 31 years. I did not know this method existed. I do now. Thank you for the correction. She put the letter in Winifred's ledger. Right beside the note, do not open a wide face to the wind. Because a correction is what a plan wants. The Halloran cattle wintered fat on the West End. Bo drove over every Wednesday morning to check on them. He brought coffee. Sometimes he brought biscuits. He did not linger. He drank his coffee at the wire, and he nodded at Goldie, and he said the same thing every Wednesday, which was, How's your daddy? And Goldie said the same thing every Wednesday, which was, walking better. And Bo said, All right then. And he drove. By April, Bo's 31 head were back home. By May, Bo had bought 14 more head at the sale barn. By June, Bo had put down half his hay brokering license and taken up a bull calf operation instead. And in July, Bo's boy was at the Ashcroft fence line one afternoon with a spud bar over his shoulder because Bo had sent him to learn the wire from Marigold. Because Bo had said to his boy at supper, There will not always be an Ashcroft soft enough to buy out, and there will not always be a Halloran hard enough to try. And you might as well learn the thing they know before the trying is out of us. The boy was 13 years old. His name was Callum. Goldie showed him the wire. Callum said, My daddy said I was to write it down, Goldie said. All right, Callum said. What do I write? Goldie said. Whatever you notice, Callum said. That's it, Goldie said. That's how you start. Callum wrote down, in careful 13-year-old handwriting, in a fresh notebook his daddy had bought him at the pharmacy. Wire is 3-day strip. Face south when you can. Spud bar for ice. Then he thought. He wrote, ask why every time. Goldie read it over his shoulder. Goldie said, that's a good line, Callum said. Where did I get it? Goldie said. You got it from you, Callum said. All right. Odette invited Bo to Sunday dinner in September. Bo came. Bo brought his wife Merla. Merla brought a pie. The pie was pecan, Merla said, standing on the porch holding the pie. I used to bring one of these to your mama every October when Rowan was small. Then I stopped, because my husband told me to, Odette said. I did not know that, Merla said. I did not want you to know that, because I did not stop because I stopped wanting to. I stopped because I was told, Odette said. Come in, Merla. Merla came in. Rowan stood up out of his chair. Bo took his hat off. Two men who had grown up on the same county road stood in the same living room for the first time in 35 years without a fence between them. Rowan said, Bo, Bo said. Rowan, Rowan said. It has been a long time, Bo said. Yes, it has, Rowan said. Sit down. Supper's ready. Bo sat down. Two families ate at the same table. Nobody made a speech. Nobody said the words, we forgive you, or I forgive you, or I am sorry, or thank you. They passed the potatoes. They passed the green beans. Bo took 2 helpings of the pecan pie. Merla laughed at something Odette said about the price of sugar. And at the far end of the table in the seat that had been Goldie's chair since she was 3 years old, Marigold Ashcroft sat quiet, watching, listening, the way her great-grandmother would have watched, the way her great-great-grandmother would have watched, the way the women in this line had always watched. Because a woman who has walked crust in a field of standing corn for 39 mornings has learned that sometimes the biggest thing that ever happens between 2 families happens over a pie, without a word said about it, and the point is to see it, and to remember it, and to write it down in a ledger nobody would ever find in a rafter unless somebody was looking. She wrote it down that night, at the kitchen table, under Winifred's last entry, under Fern's last entry, above Winifred's. In her own hand, she wrote, Merla Halloran brought a pecan pie. September, 1st of the month, she had brought one to Odette a long time ago and been told to stop. She stopped. She started again. Nobody used the word sorry. Nobody had to. Wintering ground is not just for cattle. It is for people who have been left standing out too long. If you feed them, they come back. She read it over. She almost crossed it out because she thought it was maybe too soft, because she thought Winifred would not have written a line like that. Then she thought about it. She thought, Winifred might not have, but Winifred did not get to. So she left it. She closed the ledger. She put it on the shelf by the kitchen window where the winter light hit it. Beside the 2 Miss Junie had given her. Beside the little wooden box her mother had brought down from the attic that had 6 more inside it. Because Odette had brought them down in February, from under her hope chest, where she had been keeping them for a long time. 6 more, which made 10, which was every one Winifred wrote, which meant Elias had not burned as many as he thought he had, which meant Odette had known where they were the whole time, which meant Odette had also been waiting, which meant no woman in this line had ever really been alone, even the ones who thought they were, even the ones in the coldest winters, even the ones with pneumonia in a farmhouse in February of 1962. She stood at the shelf. She put her hand on the stack. She said, out loud, to the 10 of them, and to the woman in the town who had kept 2 of them in a fireproof cabinet, and to the man in the green Chevy who had driven a fence line for 14 mornings, and to the mother in the next room who had kept the other 6 in a wooden box under a hope chest, and to the father in the recliner who had cried on a ledger cover in November. She said, all right then, and she turned the kitchen light off, and she went upstairs to bed. The last day of October, she walked out to the West End with her father. Rowan's cane was in the truck. He did not need it out here anymore. The corn was standing, 40 acres of it, brown, rattling, uncut. Callum Halloran was on the far side of the field with a spool of electric wire walking the outside line. Because his daddy had said to be here at 7 and Callum had been there at 10 till. Rowan said, "Marigold," she said. "Sir," Rowan said. "You want to bring the herd in tomorrow or Sunday?" Goldie said. "Sunday," Rowan said. "All right," Rowan said. "Nothing more." Then Rowan said, "Something more." Rowan said, "Marigold," she said. "Sir," he said, "your great-grandmother." She said, "Yes, sir," he said. "I want to have her stone reset." She said, "The one at the plot." He said, "The one that just says wife, mother, and nothing else. I want to have it reset, with her whole name, and the years, and a line under it." Goldie said. "What line?" Rowan said. "Winifred Ashcroft, 1923 to 1962. She let it stand." Goldie looked at her father. Rowan looked at the corn. Goldie said, "Yes, sir, that's the line," Rowan said. "All right." They stood at the wire. The corn rattled. Down the fence, Callum's spool clicked as he walked it. Above the ridge, a green Chevy came slow along the county road with Osias Fenwick at the wheel and Junie Marsh in the passenger seat, because Junie had asked Osias to drive her out to see the standing corn one more time before winter, and Osias had said yes, ma'am, and had put her in the truck. They drove slow. They did not stop. They lifted a hand off the wheel as they passed. Rowan lifted a hand. Goldie lifted a hand. Callum from the far side lifted his spool, and she stood at the wire in her caramel canvas jacket, and her father beside her walking on his own 2 feet, and a 13-year-old Halloran boy stringing wire down her fence line, and 40 acres of standing corn behind them, and a stack of 10 blue leather ledgers on a shelf in her mother's kitchen, and a woman named Winifred whose name was going to be cut into a stone in the family plot next spring. She said out loud to all of it, "Let it stand," and the wind picked it up and carried it across the field, across the fence, across the county road, across the hollow, and up into the ridge line where the last of the light was going, and carried it on. The way wind in this country carries a thing that has been waited on for a very long time by people who did not stop waiting, even when the waiting was the whole of the work.